I'm going to call this meeting of the Gloucester School Committee to order. I'll remind everybody that the mission of Gloucester Public Schools is for all students to be successful, engaged, lifelong learners. This meeting is recorded by video and audio in accordance with the state open meeting law, consistent with the governor's orders suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law and banning gatherings of more than 10 people. This meeting will be conducted by remote participation. If you're calling in on a phone, you can press *9 to request to speak. If you're watching on the computer or device, there is a raise your hand button that you can tap or press to request to speak. Please use either of these options during oral communications to be recognized to speak. And Maria, can we have a roll call for attendance?
Certainly. Ms. Watson.
Here.
Ms. Wiesen.
Here.
Kathy Clancy.
Present.
Mr. Favazza.
Present.
Chairman Pope.
Here.
Ms. Prince.
Here.
And Mayor Taken does not appear to be present.
Okay, we will do, if she shows up, we'll just note the time. We're going to wave the flag salute, and we'll go directly to oral communications. Let's see. If there's anybody here who would like to address the school committee on any subject not on the agenda, this is an opportunity to speak to the school committee. You'll have to raise your hand and or, because I cannot see you, you'll have to press *9. Okay. Okay. Seeing none, we will move on to why we're here. And we're here to conduct the final interview for the superintendent of school positions with Dr. Susan Kuska. We have some prepared questions, and it's hopefully there'll be a little bit where we only have 6 or 7 questions, depending on whether the mayor shows up. So there should be more back and forth. There's more opportunity for follow-up questions. Dr. Kuska, you've come to Gloucester virtually, and the school committee has gone to Weymouth virtually. And so would you like to make a statement before we start the questions?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me again tonight. I have to say it's been a busy week for all of you for sure. And one of the things I'm most excited about right now, the more I'm getting to know Gloucester, is that the investment in this process is very commendable on your part. And to me, that speaks highly of how seriously you take the role of superintendent and how seriously the school system and the community work together collaboratively, or attempting to work together collaboratively to pick the person that's the right fit for this. I met so many wonderful people through Zoom on Tuesday. I was very impressed with the process, and it just shows your due diligence to this. That being said, I know that many people have had the chance to watch my previous interviews if they haven't been part of that in the past. And I don't want to repeat everything I've said as well, but I'm here because Gloucester seems like an excellent fit for me. I love the community itself, just virtually, and also having been physically there in the past. I know what a beautiful community is, but it's a community that seems like a very tight-knit community with a population, a school population in particular, that I'm very excited to work with, because I really, having worked in a similar sized district as well as a much larger district, I find it that I'm the type of person that really wants to be highly visible, very immersed in the community. And I believe with the size of this district and the opportunities that are available there, I will have the opportunity to do so. And that allows me to be the best superintendent that I can be, in my opinion. So I do think that with my background and experience, 25 years as an educator in multiple grade levels, I'm certainly ready for this challenge. I'm excited about it. I'm hoping that I have the opportunity to get to physically come soon to Gloucester to see even more about it. And I, again, thank you so much for the highly professional and well documented investment in this process. I can tell that this is going to be a very positive match for all of us because I can just see the investment in it. So thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you. Melissa, you have the first question.
Thank you. Welcome, Dr. Kuska.
Thank
So
you.
it's two questions. First is, during the past year, what have you done to stay current and preparing to join the school district the next school year? And then my second question is, can you tell us what your first 90 days here would look like?
Sure. So I have done some consultancy work with various colleagues, most of it just pro bono, supporting colleagues that appreciate my expertise in the field, and we problem solve situations together. I'm also going to be shortly attending I'm not sure, it's a conference I'm going to be a speaker in a live conference with teachers in the Philippines. I was invited to do so, and I'm very excited about that. I'm not even sure how many, but it sounds like a very large number of teachers that will be coming to hear me speak. And I'm going to be speaking on social justice and how that impacts leadership. So that's something I'm very excited about that's coming up very soon as well. I also have been very much trying to keep knowledgeable about all the changes that have resulted with the COVID virus and all of the remote learning procedures that are taking place. I've been watching many of the communications from the commissioner, reading all of any newsletters that are coming out on DESE because I'm trying to stay abreast of any changes. As every other superintendent and other educators in the field are, we are waiting for more direction in that. Just as recently as a few minutes ago, I was watching the news and seeing parents are craving that information as well because they're anxious about how they're going to work in the fall and support their students. So there's a lot of unknowns, and I think all of us are waiting for more information, but we have to stay on top of any communication that's coming out from the state, which I have been trying to do. And I also think there's going to be a lot of flexibility that is needed as we enter this new school year. It's going to be a day-by-day changes could take place. We're going to learn from our mistakes as we go, and I think that's going to be something that every superintendent throughout the country, potentially many parts of the world, are dealing with as well. So that's not going to be something unique to Gloucester. That being said, for me, the entry plan, I certainly could write a very formal entry plan, and I'm happy to do so if that would be something the school committee would like me to do. But to be quite honest with you, I've seen entry plans written and they're very elaborate and they're lovely. But until you get into the district itself, I would be guessing a lot of the things that I would think would be the priorities based on my research and the information I have in hand. But until you're immersed in that location and really get to talk with the educators on a regular basis and talk with the administrators, there's so much more you learn on the ground, in the field, when you're on the job. So a lot of what you write in an entry plan would not be specific to Gloucester at this time. And I think that would be something that would be maybe some goals that aren't necessarily applicable. So I feel the most important thing is to plan a very long investment in the first 6 months on the job, in particular, first 90 days, planning as many meetings with community stakeholders, with parents, making myself available to administrators, whether by Zoom, whether it be by when we can do so in person. But I think the first months are really about asking a lot of questions, listening carefully to what the community members, the families, the students all think is going well in Gloucester, and what the sort of the common threads of things that we feel are things that need to be worked on in Gloucester. That will take some time. I'm not one of the people that thinks change just for the sake of change. To me, if we're going to make any changes, it's meaningful change. And in order to make meaningful and sustainable change, it takes time to understand what the needs of the community are. I also think potentially, certainly, obviously with the pandemic, we're going to be spending a lot more time initially. This is a unique situation that I would have to be spending a lot of time initially helping to plan with the leadership team in the district all of the changes that are going to result to this potentially blended learning platform online and in person with students. So that's going to take the time that normally would be invested in all of the communication that I had spoken of. I do think at some point we might want to talk about strategic planning as a district, because it's been some time since you've had a long-term plan. And I think for many superintendents, having this pandemic happen at this time in our history is such a unique situation that it's brought to light many things that we all need to do differently. And to me, that's something that we really need to start planning long-term, how we're going to be prepared for events like this that were unforeseen and other events that could happen in the future. It's a new experience, but I don't think it's going to be the last time we deal with something like this. And I do believe that could be part of the strategic plan over the next 5 years, what we want to accomplish in 5 years, and then how we plan for these unknown and unforeseen events. So it will be a lot of work because I would think that this has added another layer to every superintendent's job, but I feel ready for the challenge and I'm ready to dive in and take this very seriously. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Does anyone have a follow-up question on that? Joel?
Thank you. So I'm just sparked by your discussion about entry plan, or the need to keep flexible. And so I'm curious, in thinking about planning and long-term planning, there's obviously variables beyond your control, being that every 2 years the school committee is up for re-election. Every 2 years the mayor is up for re-election. And as new elected officials come in and out, priorities shift, and sometimes plans that were in place seem to conflict with what leadership is now signaling. And so I'm curious if you can speak to any example in which there was a plan in place under old leadership that you were executing, and kind of a shift came, and how you either adapted that plan to new leadership or how you were able to bring the new leadership on board with the plan that was in place. If you speak to any of that, that'd be great.
Sure, and I may have mentioned this before, so forgive me if you've heard me speak of it. But one of the things that really struck me as a new administrator in my previous role, there had been a lot of turnover. Some of it was budgetary related, so I was coming in and we had a lot of reductions in positions, so wearing multiple hats and roles. And one of the things that I noticed was a real commitment to obviously professional development and growing our teachers. And one of our special ed administrators at the time had really worked with the staff to develop them and train them to be train the trainers of the UDL platform. And I highly respect UDL. I had not been trained in it, but I was familiar with it. And I was very excited that we'd be working together to develop this and sustain it throughout the district. So that was something we spent a lot of time my first year, really committed to that, many training sessions. It was embedded in the professional development, but there wasn't a long-term plan for how we're going to use that and sustain it over time. And shortly after, I'd say about a year later, that administrator did leave the district, and exactly what you are alluding to did happen. And with that, the baby went out with the bathwater, and we pretty much never saw or heard from UDL again, which was very disappointing because the staff were upset about that. There was a lot of time investment in that process, a lot of money spent on that training. And then what was it for if it wasn't, to me, if it was a meaningful program, we should have sustained that. So I worked with my superintendent at the time, and we started to put together more long-range professional development plans. You really have to have, in my opinion, plans that are 3 to 5 years, not just for the district and its goals and school improvement plans, but I also believe for the sustainability of initiatives that you're taking on. And that's why I think it's so critical to start with development of a strategic plan, so that if the community involvement is there, you certainly would want school committee representation. I would want a lot of the department heads. You don't want an unwieldy size group, but you definitely want enough representation of the population, potentially some parents, maybe a student representative, district leadership, developing a plan that has a representation of the community, that we decide as a community, where do we want to get our students to in 5 years? And one of the, I don't like to have too many initiatives in place. Maybe the 3 top priorities that we consider that are things that we need to focus on in that 3 to 5 year plan, and then some backwards planning to get there. And then once those initiatives are determined, tying that to your budget cycle so that we know the needs of the district are, whether it's personnel or resources, what are the needs that are going to be to get to those goals in 5 years, and developing a 5-year budget plan so that there are no surprises each year for what we're going to ask for in the, as far as the strategic plan. Obviously there are unforeseen costs that do come along. And then professional development, if we decide, just my example with UDL, let's decide that we did decide to do UDL as a district, then that should be sustainable so that even if the players that started the training leave the district, the rest of the community that has been part of that planning process has bought into it, and we all agree that we're not going to let go of that plan. I just think it's really critical because I've seen it far too often, and you really do want to take the time to connect those dots budgetarily. What are the technology needs of that? And I did work with my technology director to develop a 5-year plan because we had such, at the time, an unfulfilled need for infrastructure. So we couldn't get all of those needs met in 1 year. So he and I developed a 5-year plan together. And little by little, we were able to get to the result after the 5 years of building that infrastructure. But that was one of the only areas that we did do 5 years. And I really think if you can connect that to that entire strategic planning process, the buy-in from staff is there. I feel like as a school committee, you're aware of what we're going to be asking for in the next few years because we've all agreed to that. And I just think it's more sustainable over time and something that I, as a person, as a superintendent, can buy into and support. And I believe that the staff, communities, and parents know what to expect. And there's less of that unknown uncertainty if and when people do exit the district, as you're referring to, or school committee members as well. Thank you.
Any other follow-up questions on that? Okay, seeing none, will Laura, you have the next question.
Thank you. So you've already talked to this a little bit, but obviously the next school year is going to be different than any we've experienced before. What steps would you take upon joining our district to assess our current preparations for the resumption of school in the fall? And what's your vision for how our children can return to school in the safest and most effective way possible? And obviously that's different for different grade levels, and it's a hard question, but I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Sure. And forgive me, I have my earbuds in, but I do have some dogs in the background that I'm trying to keep quiet. So I apologize if you, like me, are dealing with the same issue. And it's not always the most professional, but it is the environment I'm dealing with right now.
We have kids, not dogs, but I understand.
It's probably not as loud, but so thank you for that question. Yes, this is something that I did ask about when I was meeting with the district leadership team the other day. I did want to sort of get a feel for what has been done already. And we didn't get too detailed in that because there were so many other things to talk about. But I do know that there are some teams in place that are trying to come up with some sort of a plan for the unknown uncertainty that we're dealing with. And like everyone, I'm frustrated because I want to know what the state is going to have us do. It sounds like it's going to be very prescripted and prescribed, where that doesn't necessarily mean we can all do it the same way. So that's going to be very much of a challenge. And I do think that we are certainly going to have to follow what the state prescribes. And then we're going to have to apply, how does that work in Gloucester? And that's where a lot of effort and energy is going to have to be placed. So I do know those committees have been established, and they're going to be probably ongoing for a very long time. And I would want to find out what they've done so far, what they've come up with, what's working well, what's not working well. I also think, and I do know just from having been speaking to my superintendent colleagues, that there hasn't been a lot of involvement, from what I can tell, from educators in the planning that the state is doing at this time. That doesn't mean that they may not involve some more educators in the very near future, so I can't speak to that. I'm hopeful that they will. But it sounds like the team and the committee that has been put together so far, making a lot of these decisions, is health-based. And I do think certainly the physical health and safety of our students is going to be critical here. So we do need our health, the public health department, very, very critically involved in this process. But I also think we need to know the educators are doing this right now, the blended platform of remote learning, and they know what's working well, certainly as educators, and the students know what's working and not working for them. I really would want those voices to weigh in heavily in this decision-making and this planning process, because I do think the educators certainly have come up with many obstacles that they have thought differently. Week to week, they've been planning effectively with their administrators. But I also don't know how many students have been involved in these discussions. And I really value the input that we get, particularly from our higher level students that can be very articulate. They can tell us what they would have liked to have been different if they could start this over especially our exiting seniors. So I would really like to have them involved over the summer as much as we could to hear their voices, even first and foremost, because there are many students that have really blossomed from what I'm hearing through this process. And there are many that, you know, and I'll just speak from, I have obviously teachers in my family and teachers and that colleagues and friends. So I do ask them about how they perceived it. And some of my teacher friends have told me that some of their best students and very dedicated students that we're dealing with from September on are now sometimes inherently failing in this online learning process. And it's not because they don't have the ability to do it. What I'm finding is some of them are working full time. There are economic needs of these students. And in fact, I had one of my daughter, who's a teacher, was very concerned when she had her takeout delivery, turned out to be one of her students, that we don't live in the same town that she works. So she was she said, "Mom, I was in shorts and a t-shirt and I was very uncomfortable that my student, I went to go pay the delivery person and she said to him, I haven't seen you online. I'm very concerned. I would love to have you join me." And he said, "Honestly, I am working so many hours, at 40, 50 hours a week. So it's going to affect his learning, but that doesn't mean he doesn't have the capability to learn." I think we're going to have to be very cognizant of that when we re-enter the classroom environment and not penalize our students for things that were beyond their control. And then add in that social emotional piece that we all know has been something that we've been talking about for years. But now we have students that are traumatized about even coming back physically, leaving their houses, re-entering the educational process. I really think that's going to be a huge concern and a commitment that we're going to undertake. If we don't become aware of these needs, and I know we are aware, but take them very seriously, I do not want to see students being held back in their grade level because they can't meet the standards, and how we're not assessing the standards in the way that we're used to. So how are we really sure that they're not able to have not achieved those standards? I just think there are so many layers to this that are unknown, and we're really going to have to take this very slowly and process and problem solve together, but being aware of, I guess, first and foremost, I'm here for students. I wouldn't be in education for 25 years if they weren't the first and foremost thing in my mind. So I really think they need to be a very serious role in the planning process for how we do return, so that they're both mentally prepared to return and physically prepared for the health needs. But also, I do foresee that this is not going to be an easy process. It will be somewhat of a blended learning, probably some online, some physical, and who knows beyond that at this time. But I think we're going to have to revisit this on a weekly, potentially daily basis for a while.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Any follow-ups on that? Okay, I don't see any. I have the next question, and it is about next year, but it's a little bit more about right now. We don't know what form the return of students to school will take as we wait for guidance from DESE. We can anticipate that there will be new challenges, some that are unknown at this time, but we can assume that we will be dealing with students that have fallen behind and an increase in social and emotional issues. The school has been working on the budget since before the pandemic started. The city is in the process of passing the FY21 budget. And then the school committee will have to reconcile our budget with the appropriation from the city. That will all be done by the end of this month. If we had $250,000 that was discretionary, how would you recommend that we use it?
Well, I think every superintendent would love to know that there's some discretionary money because we know how tight the budgets are and how transparent they have to be. But if there were to be some discretionary budgetary income, I would suggest in my mind that potentially adjustment counselors are going to be the people that we may need to have more of, because we know there's never enough in that field to begin with. But I do think there need to be some more small group individual counseling that's going to take place, because I dealt with, as a special educator, I had students that were school phobics that couldn't physically come to school because of their fears to begin with. We're dealing with a whole additional layer of students that maybe were always feeling safe and secure, and now we've changed the field completely. So there are going to be a significantly increased amount of school phobics, if you will, for lack of a better term. And there may be students that will attempt to return to school and will be fearful each day, and we'll have to have a separate plan for how they can transition, because they're not going to be able to make it through the day, even if it is a shortened day of some sort in that blended learning platform. And I do think that we may want to consider some sort of therapeutic potential environment in place. When I was in Weymouth, we had pre-K to 12, initially it was 1 to 12, we had therapeutic learning centers for our special needs students. And that served a great purpose for those students that had a lot of social emotional needs, but we didn't have a place for our general education students. And I recall at the time my principal of my high school and associate principal coming to me looking for additional personnel funds, which were certainly not in the budget, to see if we could come up with a solution. We had to put together a plan of using our adjustment counselors, and we had a floating sub in the building that was there every day. We were fortunate it was someone that was an upcoming person, soon to be an educator. And we took this role and we used that person, that the students, as they were transitioning back, in this case, from home or hospital settings, then we would have them start their day in the counselor's office, and this person would greet them, and this person would be the go-between. If they weren't ready to return to class, they would get the materials for that student, sit and work with them and help tutor them, if you will, to help them get through some of the materials they needed to just to be able to pass their classes in the meantime. And then slowly pulling back that Band-Aid and trying to encourage them to go out for portions of the day little by little. So we do this very well in cases with our special needs population, but there's not always a good place for our general ed population. And this is why I think you're going to need more of this potential tutorial role, someone that can fill in the gaps and as the students transition back, but certainly the counseling role, whether doing small group supports, whether online or in person. And that might be the area that would be worth that investment of potentially some discretionary money if it were available. I would be very excited to see that part of the thinking process.
Just to be clear about the money, that we, as I said, we developed our budget before the pandemic hit, and our main focus was to deal with the turnaround situation at the high school as well as O'Malley, and try to support that through a couple of new positions. So it isn't that we just got a bucket of cash.
Of course.
It's that we do have, we did make some decisions back in early April, actually March, late March, which those priorities may have changed, but at the time we thought they were quite important. One of the options, and I'd like to hear your opinion on this, is that because we don't know what we're going to be dealing with, what we're going to have to pay for, whether we're going to have to be providing PPE for every student every day, whether we're going to have home lunches and in-class lunches. There are a lot of things that we don't know. One suggestion might be to sit on any money we have until we do know. So should we be cautious or should we invest?
I tend to be frugal in these procedures because, you know, as a mother raising 3 children by myself, after my divorce, I had very young children and a very limited budget. So I had to be very penny wise in my home budget, and I feel the same as a business person, and this is a business as much as we're in a business of educating students. It is still a business, and we have to be very careful about spending funds and overspending and running out of funds that we need to sustain the resources in place and to educate our students. So one of the things I did, and I think this would be similar to how I would think here, at one point we had, I was helping to oversee the Title I funds and expenditure for the district. We had some schools that were designated as Title I, some got some limited funds, and we were trying to spread those funds throughout the district to give some more supports to students. And I found out that some of our positions were being paid for out of Title I that really should have been part of the school budget initially and not coming out of the grant, because we can't supplant the funds that were that are supposed to be in the budget. So in this case, I had those funds and I said, let's start an MTSS interventionist model. It's somewhat tutorial, but the intervention is really to help support students' needs as they arise. And because they were unknown, when students are returning, as they are in this case, in September, we will not potentially know what the needs are. We may be able to predict some of them for sure, but we will not know until those students are returning and in front of us as educators how significant they are and for who they are significant. And that's why in this case, we took those funds and we decided that we would not hire those positions until potentially October through May. And the reason for that is we took time at the beginning of the year, the teachers and the support staff took time to do some data assessment of their students as they were entering the school year, some benchmarking, doing some, probably in this case, you'd be doing more benchmarking than normal to find out what their levels are entering and what their needs are. And then that way, because we hadn't started the year with these positions, we were able to then group the kids based on their specific needs. And then in October, these additional support staff came in, and then we decided whether it was in math or in literacy, or potentially in this case, there could be sports, as I mentioned, through this transition process, returning to school, home health needs. And by not identifying specifically what work these educators were doing until we knew better after the first month of school, the funds were there and they were going to be from October to May. And it actually turned out to be a very effective model. We started adding back this model so that at one point each school got at least one interventionist. The middle schools had two math and literacy interventionists in this model. And they weren't there to do the tier 1 education. They were there to support the needs of the students and give additional supports in tier 2 and 3. And I do believe that's something similar that I would want to see here, because we know that every student should be getting their tier 1 supports and their basic education. But the tier 2 and tier 3 could be in the social emotional area, could be math, could be other content areas, and having those funds for a similar model, identifying what types of supports we need and which type of support interventions we need would be a worthy investment, in my opinion, in giving us a little time to really dig into what the needs of the students after they enter in the fall.
Does anybody have a follow-up question on that? Joel?
Yeah, I was pleased to hear that your go-to would be adjustment counselors and the like to help beef up that staff. Recently, in our city, the city council has just authorized a loan order for, it's like roughly $1.6 million to renovate entrances at our middle school and our high school with an aim toward improving school security in light of the many instances of school shootings throughout the country in years. You know, doing the quick math, that same money that could fund salaries for 2 or more school psychologists or adjustment counselors for a decade. And so my question is, do you think money like that, with the aim toward keeping students safe, is better spent in physical improvements as we have chosen, or would you prefer to see that money spent in staff that you know to treat the problem sooner, I guess?
That's a loaded question because I value equally both needs. And I can tell you, some of you probably heard me speak on school safety and security. School safety and security was one of the hats I wore as a facilitator for our safety and security committee. And at the time, I had no budget for safety and security, and like you, was concerned that our entrances were very open and unsecure. IDs were not checked by anyone entering until after they were. And then if we did find someone that was potentially not safe to be in a building based on potential felony records that they already had or things like that, it was too late because they were already in the building and they could potentially walk right by. So I had a lot of angst about that myself because I was worried about the physical safety first, hearing all the things that are going on in the country. And without a budget, I went to visit at the time Quincy Public Schools. They had put in $500,000 in their budget. This is some time ago now. So they had been given by the mayor about $500,000 to do similarly what you're talking about. I loved some of the work that they had done. And then I went back to and I brought some of the police officers with us that would be working with me, my director of maintenance and some of our other facilities persons. And then I went back and I said, well, how do we do something similar with a zero budget? Well, we somewhat did do that. And I'm not suggesting you can do it with zero, but I had a very rigorous maintenance staff. We have electricians in Weymouth. We had painters. They did much of the physical work of the buildings. So we put together a plan. I certainly couldn't get this work done in 1 year or 2 years. So we tried to get it done within a few years. And my director and I worked very closely, went every summer to really look over the physical structure of the buildings and prioritize which buildings had the most needs. We started with our high school, again, with very little funds. I was able to write some safety and security grants, but I can tell you a lot was done with very little. And I may have shared some of the pictures of some of the work we did. But again, I was fortunate because we used some of our staff in-house, but also we looked at some of our potentially electrical, when we put in new lighting, some of the savings from electricity. Some years we put, when capital funding, we were able to put in some new heating systems in some of our very large buildings or very outdated buildings. Then we took that savings from the maintenance line and we used it to do some of this infrastructure that you're referring to. So I've gotten very good working with that department and really being very strategic. And so maybe there's a combination. That amount of money, that's a very exciting amount for me to think about. But I really believe, just personally from the work I was able to do with my team, with 12 buildings and some of them very outdated, we got very creative. And I would like to sort of look at that, you know, what your buildings look like in that manner to come up with some strategic ideas, because I do believe potentially that there could be a less expensive way to do that work and not let go of that, and maybe use some of that money towards some of the things that we've already talked about, because I think we haven't, the social emotional safety and well-being, the trauma that we're dealing with right now is going to really be costly for us to help service. But those physical needs, I think when you make sure that the physical buildings feel safe to our students and that we have the appropriate trainings in place for staff, that does sometimes ease the anxiety of our students and staff as well. And that's why I would never, I certainly wouldn't advocate to do one over the other. I think if we could do a combination and try to really be strategic with that funding, that would probably go a very long way, given some of the work I've been able to accomplish in the past with a very strong team of supporting me on my security committee.
Okay. Anyone else have a follow-up question? So we'll move on. Kathy, you have the next question.
Hi, Susan. The next question is, how would you lead a district for which engagement, cultural responsive teaching, and high order thinking has been identified as high priorities?
Certainly, engagement, you know, that I know two things that resonate with me as an educator, and I have visited, you know, I'm very visible in classrooms, even with 12 buildings. I try to be very visible in as many classrooms on a regular basis as possible. And when you walk into a classroom, you can sense the engagement, and you also have to look for the rigor and the academic outcomes as well. And the teachers that are the most successful, having that balance of rigor and engagement in the classroom, and that sets the tone for the students and the culture in the classroom. The same is true of our administrators. What do they do in each building? They set a strong tone as the leaders of the building for the culture in that building, because it's very interesting to me, you know, having worked with many different leadership styles, and you can go from one building that has a very strong culture and community and support, and I could go to another building that is a very similar size and very similarly staffed, but the culture is very different and sometimes more negative in one building. And sometimes it's just taking a different lens and looking at what can we do, what's working in one building that we can maybe replicate in another building. I think the same is true when we see exemplary teachers doing wonderful things in our buildings academically, having our teachers in other buildings that maybe are having struggles for whatever reason, there may be newer teachers, and allowing them chances to go visit other buildings to see what wonderful things that happen academically helps to improve. That peer modeling is very important. So in this instance, if there are administrators that have been able to help support and grow and foster a culture that is very supportive and develops that sense of community for both the students and staff, then are there things that we can have the administrators and staff from another building that may be struggling a little bit, go and do visits to those buildings, because I think there's so much more we learn from our peers that we can replicate, and we don't need to start from scratch if there are things that we're being successful at. But cultural engagement certainly is critical, and part of that cultural engagement comes from the engagement of how we engage our family members with our students. And I know I talked significantly about this, so I won't talk too much about it, but family engagement, trying to encourage our parents who maybe are struggling at home. And now we have parents that maybe were very engaged and are overwhelmed with this online learning platform. How do we re-engage those parents? Because they're also struggling, and we're going to have to work even harder to build them back up and build our staff back up as they re-enter. So this is really a unique year for everyone. The normal things that we would do as administrators are going to have to be rethought. I do have ideas for, certainly how we can just have school spirit and things like that. There are some buildings that do a great job of that and are able to engage students to support one another. Again, I always say, defer back to the students. They are soaking everything in, and I really think we need to have some more, and you may already have, but certainly you have student advisory teams probably at the high school, but even at some of the younger levels, can students have some input into some of these things? What would they like to see happen in their school? Time on learning is very important, but if you can't engage students and have them be excited to come to school, then they may not be able to learn, and that leads to negative attendance as well. There's so much that goes into this. I definitely think it's worth investing time and effort into, but I do think as much as some of the things I've probably done in the past are going to not work, given the uniqueness of what we're coming to into the fall. And I think we're going to have to really be, again, flexible as to how we try to re-engage a population, because we're looking at much higher numbers than ever before that will need additional supports. And then how do they feel re-engaged in the learning process if they're not feeling invested in that community? They've been away from school a long time. So students that may have felt very happy and very fulfilled and very connected in school, sports, all of those things, we don't know how that's going to look in the fall. So a lot of the typical things, after school enrichment, so many of the platforms that we use as educators to engage students that academics may not be their high priority, but their arts, music, and potentially after school programs, we don't know what that's going to look like either. So that's going to be another challenge that we have to, another hurdle to overcome. If the students are not able to do some of the things that they normally are engaged in and that supports the community of the school, that's going to make it an additional challenge. So I don't know that I have all of the answers on that yet, because this is a very unique situation, but I certainly think it's something that we're going to have to put some significant time and effort into.
Kathy, did you want to follow up on that? I think there were some other parts of that question.
Oh, sorry if I missed it.
Yes, the part you did not address is higher order thinking.
Oh, well, thank you. And so I think I started with that and I lost my train on that. So again, when I mentioned visibility in the classroom, there are two things. When I'm walking into classrooms, you can typically walk in a classroom and get a strong sense of engagement very, very early on. You can see when students are enthusiastic about their learning. You can also see students who are not engaged, heads down on desks, not paying attention, potentially earbuds in place, not hoods on. You can tell when students are not engaged. And I have been in classrooms where I've seen incredible amount of engagement, but there isn't necessarily a lot of rigor. So when I think of higher order thinking, I think that goes along with rigor, and assessing rigor gets a little trickier. It really, to me, it means we know that there are tier 1 standards that the students all have to be exposed to, but do they know what their learning is? Do they know the objectives? Do they understand what the objectives are? And engaging them and really making sure that they are exposed to, going back to, I think the other day I talked about differentiated instruction. That's been a term we've used for years and years and years. But what does it look like in the classroom? Because you do need to tease out, if students have already learned certain standards, why are we exposing them again? And other students may be able to be capable of doing higher order thinking, and we're holding them back if we stick them doing the tier 1 standards that we're doing for everybody. I think this is going to be even more challenging as well, because our typical students that would be ready to do higher level thinking and be able to be getting more enrichment are now going to be maybe some of our struggling learners because they've had some setbacks with this process. My opinion is that we are going to see multiple levels within each classroom, and I really worry about penalizing those students, as I mentioned before. If we assess students as they enter and benchmark and dipstick to see where they are as they enter, that's going to be very important. But we're going to need to give them time to re-enter the climate, re-enter the classroom. And I really would not want to make any drastic decisions. You know, sometimes, particularly at the high school level, I've seen situations where a student enters and they get an assessment entering the classroom. And for whatever reason, they didn't achieve the standards from the previous year, potentially whether it's from a teaching issue, or in this case, it's that regression they could have had because of this long break from school in a traditional manner. And I saw some teachers take that entry assessment and score that. And if the student failed that assessment, that failing grade entered into their end of the term grade, and they were failing from the get-go. There was no place to go. Even if you average everything out, they were already failing before they even entered the classroom. So we're going to really want to be very careful about the assessments we give students, if just try to benchmark and to try to group them effectively to make sure we can identify their needs. And as I mentioned, potentially by giving some more support. So maybe by October, kind of knowing which kids might need additional supports outside of the classroom with some additional trained staff. And that's why I really think we're going to have to put some strong emphasis on that, because in the past, I saw some of these students would automatically be moved down to a lower level just because of this one assessment. And you're going to see that far more drastically in an environment like this. It's a long learning process. The regression is going to be significant. We see that over the summer. For some students, we see it just over the Christmas and April break. And now we've had a long-term break. As much as the teachers are doing, some of our students are not being as successful in this online learning platform as we would like.
Samantha?
So your response sort of jogged my memory about something that came up during a site visit with one of your teachers. They mentioned something called the unconference model. Could you sort of explain that? I'm just curious if that's similar to what you were talking about just now, to give teachers more choice in what they teach.
So I was not the person that, I can't take credit for having us do an unconference model, but we were hearing at one point when we were planning professional development, teachers were feeling that it was very prescribed. And as you know, I worked with very many teachers, about 525 teachers. And when you're trying to plan professional development, there are certain things that every teacher might need because we've all agreed this is a non-negotiable for the district. But you can't prescribe all of the PD because each teacher has their individual needs. Each school has their school improvement plans and different focus areas. And then depending on what topic the teachers teach or what content expertise they are, there are so many things to be learning. And there's no way a district can do it all perfectly. So at one point we were hearing from teachers that they were feeling that it was a very prescribed PD. The district, and I agreed that there was far too much emphasis that the district was planning too many of the PD sessions. Schools weren't getting as much input, and I had a concern about that. But I had voiced my concern, and we hadn't been able to come to a resolution to that. And with that, the unconference model was brought to someone's attention. I don't recall who. And we decided if people had areas of expertise as teachers that they could do at the PD session that they could share with other teachers, we wanted to hear what their thoughts were. And we reached out to these teachers and asked them for topics that they thought that they had some expertise in that they would like to teach, if you will. It was only a one, we may have done it twice, but it was only, they were only doing that topic once because the PD would take place and teachers would choose what unconference they would like to sign up for, depending on the topics that we were given for the day. Some of them were more successful than others and were very well attended. And as a learning curve, some of them were not. But I do think it gave teachers more ownership of their professional development and more ownership in the learning process for the educators. So in that manner, I definitely could foresee something like that with students. If we could give our students more input into what they feel that they need to learn and what they would like to be exposed to within the content area that they're being instructed, I do think we could get more engagement in the learning process. Maybe there are some students that could teach one another. Peer modeling, as I mentioned, with teachers, they learn from one another very well. Administrators learn from each other. Can we have a peer modeling that our students are allowed to potentially get some topics that they are feeling like they could model and share? Again, they need to be tied to the standards, so the teacher would have to approve them. But I do feel that the teacher as facilitator is really the teacher that we need today. Not that in the front, the sage in the front of the room is not the direct instruction that we need to be continuing to do. And I do still see that sometimes, but we really need to think of educators as facilitators. So if our students have ideas of things that they could help support, things that maybe they've already mastered certain standards, how could they do a lesson on that? I really think a teacher could approve those lessons for students. So yes, we haven't done that with students, the unconference model, but I definitely think that's a model that students would welcome. And especially as they get to higher levels, you see this more as students age into high school levels, they are very clear on what's working successfully and what's not. And I really think we need to hear their voices in the learning process, just as we need to hear from our educators in their growth process, in their professional development. So I do like that idea. And the teachers were very excited about it. And I was encouraged because I was able to visit a lot of those and see, not all of them were as successful because not everybody was as comfortable in that platform. But over time, giving more of that voice and more input, I do think that's a model that could develop, whether you call it unconferencing or just allowing students to be the teacher for the day, various things. There's a lot of benefit to that for sure.
Samantha, you have the next question.
So my apologies ahead of time because it's multi-part. So you're welcome to write them down, or would you like me to say them one by one?
I can jot them down, so I hopefully won't forget.
Okay. So we as school leaders are people who have influence on young people in our teaching, our policy development, our curriculum development, and how we show up in the world as role models. It is our job, our duty, to actively dismantle systems of oppression and impact the students we serve. In my opinion, it is not enough to talk about equity. So the first question is, in what ways will you show up for students and staff of color, immigrants, and those living in poverty in our district? Next one is, how have you shown a commitment to anti-racist work? The next one is, how will you show a commitment to recruiting more staff of color that can more accurately mirror our changing demographics in our student population? And then finally, you've talked a lot about family engagement, and a similar theme exists here, that family engagement differs greatly from school to school, and it's part based on demographics of the student and family population. So if you talked a lot about the family engagement model, would you want to replicate that here? And if so, how would you do it?
Sure. And I did talk a lot about that, so I will try to think how I definitely think I would like to replicate a similar model, but let me go back to some of the other pieces. You've heard me talk a lot about equity and social justice. I am passionate about it. I think it looks differently for different students. I think it looks differently for different staff. But the way we get equity and social justice is by having an expectation that it is going to take place in the classroom, in the community, in the schools that we work in, for both staff and students. And when I say that, we know that students of color and students with different cultural, different language systems, they definitely have more of a struggle in our classroom. And I think we definitely, no matter where I've worked, we all need to do a better job supporting the needs so that there is more equity in those areas. And some of the things that, you mentioned role models. We are role models to our students. As a superintendent in a school system, I feel I am a role model to staff and students, to our leaders, and I need to be able to inspire them to be the best that they can be. And I can only do that if I practice what I preach and I go the extra mile to put some effort into these areas, because there is a lot of oppression. We're living it. Right before this, some of you as well probably were watching the memorial service for George Floyd, and our students are watching that. So they're waiting for cues as they return to the fall, what we do over the summer. They are looking at us to be the change makers, the positive change. But this is not going to be fixed overnight. This is a long-standing system of oppression in our country. We've seen it in many, many forms throughout the years. I'm excited that many people are standing together and speaking up, and this is really a critical time in history for all of us. And as educators, our students are going to be looking to us to show them that we support, we believe, and we are going to be part of that positive change that hopefully is the loss of some of the lives that we've seen recently is not for, is a worthwhile move for our future. So that's going to be very critical. And I think we're all going to be part of that positive change moving forward. Part of that, to me, also, we all present with unconscious bias. We all have maybe some more explicit bias in our systems, but everybody has biases. It depends on how you were raised. Anything that you're presented with from birth all the way through your education is definitely part of your environment that creates who you are. It doesn't have to be a bad thing. Bias doesn't mean bad. For me, it's really, when I took a lot of courses in social justice during particularly my doctoral program, it really helped me even open up my lens more. I was also always passionate about this, but when you work with educators of color and leaders of color and hear their stories and try, that empathy is so important, and to develop a system of really asking questions. How can I be better by listening and trying to change and support all of the various cultures that we have within a school system? So that's an ongoing thing that we need to be working on. And I do think that could be embedded in the strategic planning as well. I also think as leaders, we need to not be afraid to have difficult conversations. Some people are afraid to ask difficult things because they worry about how that is perceived. And I'll just give you an example because of my own background. I'm very immersed with a gay son who has many friends in the LGBTQ community. So when I go to visit him in Chicago, I meet many of his friends from very different backgrounds than I grew up in. And I feel that I can be a better leader of the LGBT community by finding out what the oppression that they've dealt with and asking a lot of questions. And because they're adults, it's a very easy conversation to have. But I have learned so much from his peers, and it helped me as a leader in a district that still had, all districts, you know, we're dealing with various different cultural needs. And it helped me to support my administrators who maybe weren't as comfortable with the LGBT community and the needs of their students. So I could help open that conversation and be very open and honest about what I had learned, and we learned from one another. So the same needs to hold true with race and culture and students that are marginalized, special ed, whatever it is. We have so many competing needs, and we need to be very strategic about asking students questions, asking our teachers questions. You know, as I mentioned, I learned so much from my peers that are sometimes people of color. I have a very dear colleague who is from the Philippines, and I have said to her, I would love you to come speak on this topic, because she has lived that lens coming from the Philippines to America as a leader and coming into a very unique culture that she is dealing with. That's something that our students need to hear, role models of color coming in. And with that, because I was so passionate about trying to do some more work on it, I've really struggled. How can we do better and encourage and recruit leaders of color to come to our districts, especially when they may look at if you're looking for teachers of color and they look at the other staff in our district and they see that no one looks like them, just like some of our students feel, none of my leaders look like me, none of my teachers look like me. We know that our students benefit significantly from having role models of color in front of their classes as much as possible, but we know that we're also struggling to find them from higher ed. I did come up with the model of working with the Mass Partnership for Diversity in Education. I partnered with them, I partnered Weymouth with them, and I started attending their meetings. And it was an incredible group of leaders from throughout the area. Many of those assistant superintendents, HR people, various leaders from various districts were people of color. And that allowed me as a white leader to really learn from them and what they've been successful at. So, and I asked a lot of questions, as I always do, because I learn best by learning from them. And what we talked about recruitments and how we get leaders to come to our district, how we get staff. And one of the things I came up with, there was a job fair that MPDE did every year. And they brought in people of color that were coming out of college to get their resumes, talking about various jobs throughout various parts of Massachusetts. So I thought, I think I need to do better than that. And last year I looked at my principals and I said, can you all do a job fair with me? I had my department heads, transportation, food services, my HR person helped support paraprofessionals. So my focus area was teachers, because that was our largest group. But I also wanted to offer potential employment to other people of color in other departments. So I took those 42 resumes from this job fair that MPD had sponsored, and I invited each of those people of color to come to the district and meet with my team at a night job fair. I then invited additional people from the community because I didn't necessarily have jobs for those particular needs of those individuals, but I wanted to start somewhere. We ended up with my recruitment from the community. We had a job fair with about 250 people attending. It far exceeded my expectations for the first job fair that we had. And we weren't necessarily able to hire, as we didn't get as many of the people of color that I would have liked to attend it, but we did have some. And some of those people did get interviews with our principals, and I believe some of them did get hired. Not too many, because a lot didn't attend, but baby steps along the way. So anything I could do to replicate that model, I had only been able to do it that 1 year. I would like to roll that model out, but first it would start with partnering Gloucester with the Mass Partnership for Diversity in Education, and either myself or one of our leaders in the district attending those meetings so we could have some of those more recruitment opportunities. And little by little, it does make a difference. You can make headway. But also, once we have our diverse candidates enter the district, sometimes they don't maintain the role in the district because they don't feel supported. We need to do better with our mentorship programs as well. I've seen that fail some of our staff. There were times when I had, we recruited we had an Asian teacher enter and a Black male enter as math teachers, and higher level math at the high school level can be very challenging. And these teachers were struggling in some of their content and some of their behavior management. And I don't feel at the time, I was concerned because I didn't feel that they had been given the proper supports they needed, not just as an academic leader, but also as people of color coming into a district that didn't have as many role models for them in the district. So I think we need to do a better job of supporting staff of color when they enter the district, because they're having more unique situations than our typical teachers, and there might be some other supports we can put in place so that we can retain those staff once we do the job of recruiting them. And I'm sorry, I'm getting very passionate about this topic because it's something that I've really tried to focus on for some time, and I get very frustrated because the process is very slow, but I won't give up on it because I think it's so critical that we just keep picking away and trying to do a better job because our students need it. Oh, and then finally, the family engagement. I did talk to you a little bit, I believe, the other day about this. We, just like Gloucester, there's different scenarios at each building. We had 12 buildings. We had 8 primary schools, and the socioeconomics and potentially the student population diversity was different from building to building. So some of our students just were able to be exposed to incredible amount of enrichment opportunities, whether after school programs during the day that parents would sometimes support. We know that sometimes the school budget is not handling all of these needs, and we have PTOs and groups that are all often able to help support these. So because we had some more rigorous PTOs at some of the buildings, some of the students were getting incredible opportunities to attend STEAM events and multiple events that other students weren't getting before and after school. And that led to my family engagement committee. I decided to I was overseeing that committee with another staff member, and we took it to a different level. It started because I had a principal say to me, Susan, I'm really concerned because my students and my PTO aren't getting the funds to be able to do some of these things. Do you have any funds at the district level? And I didn't. There was no line item for family engagement. The best I could do, and it ended up becoming fairly successful, was to try to create some year-round events that all students could attend, so that all students could have an opportunity to go to. The largest one that we started in 2015 and replicated each year was Full Steam Ahead, and that was our family event that we had our planetarium. We opened it up and did 2 free planetarium visits for the students that could attend that. We had multiple community members come and do activities, all you name it, we did it. And typically when I counted up with my community liaison, we often had up to 400 students. But that wasn't enough to just invite our public school students. We invited our students from the private schools as well. We opened it up to the community. And in this instance, that's a way to also encourage, and I know some of the struggles and talking about population declines in Gloucester. When students see the exciting things that are happening in Gloucester schools, and we can showcase those through family engagement events. I would have our high school students that were in the CTE program would do some of the activities that they did in school each day, through culinary, through robotics. And those students came as volunteers and did events for us. But then students that might not be in our school system saw those exciting things happening at the high school and throughout the district, and little by little, we started to pull some of those students back that may have left to a local charter school or otherwise. So yes, this is about equity for our students, but it's also a way to engage the community as a whole and hopefully bring back some of the students that might have left for various reasons and gone to different school systems through the school choice model that I've heard a little bit about as well. So I apologize for digressing.
Samantha, go follow up.
About the family engagement, where did the funding come from, and specifically, how would you replicate something like that? Was it grant funded, or I guess I'm like thinking a little bit more about the nuts and bolts.
Absolutely. And no, there was no fund for it. And the goal here was absolutely 100% that students would not have to pay for things. Everything was going to be free. That was the primary goal because I wanted that equity piece, and we really strove to do so. So because we had no funding, I have to give credit to my community liaison. This person had been, had students in the school system and had worked there for many, many years. She was not a highly paid person, but she was an incredible advocate for the school system, and I helped supervise her and oversee her and help support the work that she was doing. So I credit her for a lot of that initial work of engaging the community. So she really did a lot of the outreaching and looking into people in the community that might volunteer, whether time, we sometimes would get with, just giving an example, we did many events, but the STEAM event was probably our largest event. And she'd go to some of the local other engineers that could do some lessons with students. So some of our volunteers would fund the activity that they were doing for the event. Other people may not want to do the physical work, but they did some small donations. I'm talking very small donations, so that some of our own staff would volunteer at the event, and then we would buy some of the materials with that. If I look back to how successful these were, they were not funded by the school district. They really were funded by volunteerism primarily, but all of that legwork that we did was because we did a lot of outreach to volunteers in the community that want, in some cases, volunteers will step forward because the focus of these events was not to bring in business for these community members, but as a secondary thing. If you see, for example, we had someone that did portraits, for example, and maybe did a caricature, supported the funds for caricatures that our high school students could do caricatures of the students. Well, we do show who helped and volunteered at these events. So indirectly, they might be able to increase their own business because people see the wonderful work that they're doing. So it's a win-win for them, but the primary focus was to bring events to our students free of charge. And I was fortunate that I had a really strong community liaison to do that work. We advertised in the paper. I would attend Chamber of Commerce events because all the businesses at the Chamber of Commerce, and we would seek their support for some of these events because a lot of times they were looking to raise funds. So we would ask them, what can you do free of charge? But again, win-win for everybody because it also sometimes brings light of a business in the community that might be a match for something a parent would be looking for. So, I can't say this is easy work, but it was well worth the effort. I was very excited. The problem I did have was that burnout factor, because if you do multiple events in a year, you're often asking the same volunteers to step up to the plate. So we did worry each year. It was the same group, a small group of leaders that were doing a lot of this physical planning. So the more you can get and encourage different groups to take on different events, that was the focus I started to go to. Could I have a principal at one school maybe own the planning for a certain event so we're not getting burnout factor for the leaders that are doing the work and also for the volunteers that are attending?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Joel, do you have a question?
Not beyond what I've asked today already. Thank you.
Okay. Maya Taken, do you have any questions or follow-up you'd like to?
No, thank you.
Okay. Does anybody else have any further questions or follow-up on any other questions? Laura.
Thanks. So I'm, as you now know, we have two schools that are in a turnaround situation. And I agree that the focus going into this new school year is, first of all, just going to be having the school year start in whatever form it's going to start in. But as far as like academic, your experience, if you could speak to your experience with creating academic supports, really curriculum-based academic supports for this kind of situation to strengthen academic performance? I would love to hear about that.
Sure, I can talk to that a little bit as well. Well, we too had that struggle in Weymouth when we were dealing with the level 1, 2, 3, 4 on the accountability model. And at one point we had a school that was continuing to be level 3. And then we added a second school, unfortunately, that had been one of our higher achieving schools, but the leveling system is challenging, as you know, to maintain level 1. Level 2, it can be challenging sometimes. So we had 2 schools out of the 12 that did lower to level 3, and we were struggling to find a way to support them. Because they were level 3, we were given some state support from DSAC, and I was part of our accelerated improvement planning team. We had a committed group of administrators. Certainly the administrators that were in these schools that were struggling were part of that team. I was part of the team, and we met regularly with DSAC to get some additional supports for our schools, and they did give us some supports that came in and did some work with our staff, but it was certainly a struggle. I will say, as I can't take the credit for any of the curriculum work, because in this particular role I wasn't doing curriculum. I did that in my previous role, but I did work closely with the team to talk about these common concerns and common threads, and we looked at data with our we had a statistician who put together the data for us very significantly, and we talked a lot about that data and what it was meaning for our students, particularly in these more struggling schools. And then we really put some focus into these schools, giving more supports. In some cases, were able to use Title I funds to put some extra staff in these schools. So we tried to prioritize that if the Title I students were in these schools, and we were able to do that in one of the schools. The other school, they did an incredible job because the administrator himself just was very concerned, because it had been at one point a level 1 school, and it really concerned him that they had dropped to level 3. That was a significant drop. So he and his staff really put a concerted effort into it, working with the curriculum leaders as well. But I have to give credit to the staff and the administrator himself, because they were passionate about doing something. And within 1 year, they were able to rise to a level 1. And it was because they started doing a lot of more, from what I could tell, more peer modeling, so that teachers that were doing exemplary work started sharing some of that work more so with the other teachers. And also we did have a tier 2 and tier 3 intervention model in place. I mentioned we started using our MTSS interventionists that I had worked with Title I to try to engage in each school. So they started to be very strategic as to how they were using some of these support staff to support some of the students that were struggling and doing poorly and affecting some of this accountability. And I have to give credit to that school. They rose the following year to level 1. We all went as a leadership team, and we celebrated together with the teachers and applauded them for all that work. And they worked hard to continue that positive work that was happening. So when you see exemplary teaching like that, and a school, there's some inconsistencies from school to school. Well, first of all, as curriculum leaders, we need to try to make sure that there are non-negotiables that all students are getting through the curriculum model and mapping and so forth, and all the assessments. So there do have to be some basic non-negotiables so that we have equity for students. But when we identify teachers that are exemplary in their areas in certain schools, particularly maybe the schools that are doing some work that's being more successful, how are we sharing that work that they're doing? How are we helping them work with their peers? I think I mentioned it a little bit before, but I'm a high believer in, if you have exemplary leaders and teachers in certain schools, bring other ones. I don't like to pull teachers out of class any more than needed, because then their students can fall behind in teaching and learning. But for small pockets of opportunities, are there ways to get them to go look at a model lesson in various buildings of a similar grade level or a similar content area? I do think this is a lot of work has to be taken, so you're not pulling the same teachers out all the time. And then if there are teachers that we identify some common concerns, we need to provide additional supports with them, some specific training for their individual needs. And this is where professional development, I believe, as much as we have to have professional development district-wide, that we have certain things that we're all working on, each school also has to have specific goals that they're working on, and they have to have some freedom to do so. When we take, as a district, as the leader of the district, when we take all those PD blocks to do district-wide goals, then we're not leaving time for that. And I do think you have strong leadership. I know, having talked to them, to give them the freedom to identify some of these things with their staff, to give them the freedom to plan some of their own professional development with some support from curriculum leaders in many cases. I just think we need to empower staff in a much more meaningful way. And if we prescribe everything, we don't get to the best of our teachers. I do, I'm very strong about making sure that all of our children are exposed to the standards. They all need the grade level standards, but I don't.
I think you just lost your
We
audio.
just lost your audio.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
But you're frozen.
I hope I don't
Oh,
lose
there you go.
myself.
No, there you are.
Okay, it just went on again, so I hope it doesn't happen again, or I'll have to switch to my phone. I don't know what you heard, so I don't want to repeat myself too much, but I'm really a huge proponent of empowering teachers and empowering leaders to have some role in this decision making and not prescribing everything to them. Certainly there's got to be equity and an expectation that there are certain things that they have to teach and standards have to be taught, but how they do it, they need to have their own flair and a little bit of input into their own classroom, as long as they're meeting the standards for all students.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Any other questions from anybody? Well, seeing none, if you'd like to add to that in any way, Dr. Kustka, this will be it. Okay.
Well, forgive me if you saw my passion arise tonight. I am very passionate about being a leader, I'm an educator first and foremost, 25 years in education, 15 years in special ed, middle school, elementary levels. I've taught many grade levels, K to 8. So first and foremost, I am an educational leader, and I take that very seriously. As I moved into a leadership role, it was because I started feeling confident that I had something to give back, and I felt I had a calling to my fellow teachers. What could I do? Because I had gained a lot of experience. I felt there was a lot of mentoring I could do. And that's how I initially became a leader, was I really felt that I had acquired some skills and I could really maybe inspire and mentor and model struggling teachers in an administrative role. I was passionate about curriculum development, professional development, and I was fortunate when I moved into my leadership role, I was given a lot of autonomy by my superintendent in Hanover to really run with the work that needed to be done there. The Common Core was coming out. I jumped on board and started working with all staff and helping to implement and develop and support them in the work that they needed to do. And over time, as much as I wasn't doing direct instruction, I could see that that work that I was doing as a leader does have an effect on students in a positive way if you can inspire and support and mentor and role model teachers and administrators that you're working with. So I'm very excited to do this work. I know that you can tell that I'm passionate about many areas. However, in addition to having that educational background, I have been fortunate that having been a leader in administration and personnel for a number of years, overseeing HR, I've had to pretty much wear every hat in many cases in various roles. And all of those roles help define and create who I am and who I will be as a superintendent. The educational piece obviously is my passion, and supporting students and helping them be the best that they can be for college and career success in their futures is very important. But I have a strong understanding of the needs of a district for the operations, the maintenance, capital funding, budget development, personnel matters, doing investigations, you name it. I think I've done it. It doesn't mean you won't shock me with something new, but I really got very excited, even more so in my conversations with many of your staff the other day. I started to feel, just in that small forum with some of your teachers, there were some connections and excitement that I was gaining, and I really feel that I just feel ready to come to Gloucester and continue to develop those connections with staff. I mentioned entry plan. Entry plan is really about learning and earning trust and respect mutually back and forth from staff. There are things that may change over time, but it can't be initiated by me. If you're going to have positive, sustainable change and growth and improvement for your district, it has to be a united working group. It can't be coming from the top down. And I'm very collaborative in my approach, but I work very hard to use my strong leadership skills. I do think this is a calling for me, and I do think this is what I need to be doing, because I feel like some of the things I've talked about, the equity for students, increasing recruiting teachers of color, leaders of color, all of the work that I'm passionate about will help grow and support the work that Gloucester would benefit from as well. I think we're a great match. Just what I've learned of Gloucester, the community connection, the supports you have. Again, I feel like I really saw that very well it was very exciting to see on the municipal side how many people on that end were also part of these meetings. You don't always see that. So the investment from your town leadership, I was very excited about. A very collaborative approach. Could we do strategic planning together and be part of that process and develop a long-term vision? I believe we could. And I believe I'm the best candidate to do so, but it's more so because I know and I want to do this. I want to take it very seriously. I talked about relocating. That will be a challenge. You know, it'll take me some time to adjust to some of the changes, but I'm willing to put in that time investment because Gloucester seems like a community that will welcome me and that I would welcome and help to make some positive, sustainable change over time, long-term changes with the results being positive for students. So I really have to thank you. I hope you do pick me. I do think we would be a great match. However, I do want you to be feeling that you have the best candidate for your district because students deserve that. And in the end, I wish you the best in your final decision because it's a big decision and a very important one for your students. And I just thank you so much for giving me this chance. It's been a lot of meetings now, and it's helped me to get so far, a very solid understanding of Gloucester, but I know I would like to learn so much more when I can physically join you there for other events as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And as I said, we have another interview tomorrow night. And then on Monday night at 6 o'clock, we're going to convene and hopefully make a final decision.
Excellent. Well, good luck and have a great weekend before I hear from you again.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
We'd all be up walking around shaking hands now, but
Take care.
Virtual
okay.
high-five.
All right.
Bye-bye.
So that is the end of our agenda. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, Maria, can we have a roll call vote?
Ms. Watson,
Yes.
Ms. Weason,
Yes.
Kathy Clancy,
Yes.
Mr. Favazza,
Yes.
Chairman Pope,
Yes.
Ms. Prince,
Yes.
and Mayor Taken.
Sorry, that wasn't her.
Yes. Ha, ha, ha. I had to get off the other one to get on this one, yes.
Okay, thank you. The meeting is adjourned